Hey, welcome to another episode of Engaging Personalities. My name is Anders Belanger, founder and CEO of Engagify, and we believe in rehumanizing business through engagement. And I have a guest that I think you're going to be very interested in. She's part of the executive education program at Johns Hopkins University, as well as the director of the public speaking program at University of Alabama. She's also the author of Engineer to Speak. So before I introduce her, and I know Engagify, we've trained a lot of engineers. If you do technical presentations at all in sales, maybe a systems engineer, who knows what kind of engineer, you're going to want to stick around because I think there's going to be some takeaways. So I'd like to welcome to the program Dr. Alexa Chilcutt. Alexa, welcome.
Thank you, Anders. I'm happy to be here with you.
Yes. Well, thank you. And I'm going to swap us around here too, just for everyone. So that we can do a few more fancy things later if we need be. Thank you so much for joining us here. I wanted, we were kind of connected by a mutual acquaintance. Your brother. I mutually acquainted him. And he said, "Oh, you guys would hit it off." And we had a phone call, I don't know, a couple weeks ago, whenever it was, and it was like, wow, a lot of similarities. And I just loved kind of your take on things. And I just think it would be great to kind of share kind of your expertise and where you're coming from with the people here watching about making technical presentations more engaging. I mean, your book, Engineer to Speak, hold it up for us just so we can see it.
There you go.
There we go. That's when I saw that, I was like, oh, I have to talk to Alexa and find out a little bit more about that. So
we did. We had a great conversation. Lots of synchronicity. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So just before we get into kind of, some of the content, your expertise, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you kind of got into this field?
Sure. Honestly, I'm an academic. I like to say I play one on TV, an academic. Really, I'm a very practical person. I worked in public relations before returning to academia to get a doctorate degree in communication information sciences. And really I'm a PR person. I understand that any success in any field is really about getting the right messages to the right people at the right time. What do they want to know? Why do they want to know it? And how do you share that expertise that connects and engages with your audience? And so taking that public relations perspective into a communication degree, I also understood the value of understanding how to put together a presentation, public speaking. I've created communication curriculum for a variety of educational programs, actually for a dental school years ago, and then started working at the University of Alabama, have been managing and developing a public speaking program there, working with engineers through the university, the aeronautical and mechanical engineering students for about 7 years, created a curriculum for them. But then also my colleague at the University of Alabama, Dr. Adam Brooks, and I started probably about 6 years ago, creating a lot of executive education and professional development training. We had so many engineers and technical professionals in those courses that what we understood was that sometimes the technical individuals have some defaults when it comes to presentations, right? Mm-hmm. But if you give them a process, they really embrace that process.
They love processes, right? So yeah,
incredibly successful at applying the process. And that really led us to the book. As you mentioned, over the past year and a half, I've been teaching executive education, that is my passion. I really enjoy that with Johns Hopkins Carey Business School. So that's kind of me in a nutshell. I'm like every professional, still growing and evolving, and I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, but there's still plenty ways to go.
Excellent. So let's dive into some of the defaults that you kind of just mentioned in terms of technical presentations. And then maybe we can kind of talk about some of those processes or some of those ways of overcoming those defaults, if you will. So what are some of the things, and I'll probably chime in too. I'll be like, yes, I know what you're talking about. So how do we make technical presentations more engaging? And so talk about those defaults first.
I think it's always great to know what you don't want to do before you start learning a new process. If you can identify what are the pitfalls of a presentation. And so when you ask audiences, what are pitfalls of other technical presenters' presentations? What do they say? Too much data. It's a data dump.
Mm-hmm.
That it's dry, overly technical, boring, that time is not used well, right? You maybe go overtime, but I mean, really not connecting with the audience about why they need that information and at the level that they need the information. So I think those are some of the pitfalls, but they also kind of morph into the myths that we have about presentations and public speaking. And asking engineers what are some of the myths that they had, especially engineering kind of seniors, undergraduates. First of all, they think that they don't need public speaking skills or good presentation skills. The bar is set so low that they think they call it soft skills. Go ahead.
What they don't think they need it. So just kind of elaborate on that. What is it? Just that, I mean, it's data. This is the data, and that's all you need to know. Is that kind of where that's coming from?
You know that. You know this answer already. I'm telling you something you know. Right. They think that they can rely on the data. They can rely on the process and showing their work rather than understanding how to be a better presenter of that information. And communication skills, public speaking skills get labeled as soft skills. But we know through research, firsthand research, my colleague and I, interviewed technical professionals from around the world. That were at very high levels within their organizations, NASA, just incredible organizations. And we asked them about those speaking and presentation skills. And we know that while they're called soft skills, they have very tangible, hard return on investment, career advancement, project success, and project buy-in. The better communicator you are, the more just traction build.
The more success you'll have in whatever field you're in, because you're just a strong communicator.
Right.
That makes sense. Yeah. So did you have to, to win over, them to the idea of going down this road? Was there a process to that as well? Of just or just showing that there is, greater, what's the word I'm looking for? Would just be able to career longevity and acceleration too.
In working with younger professionals, you do have to kind of create that buy-in for them that it is important. And in working with younger engineers and technical professionals, we did kind of get them to do some of the research themselves, seeing who is in a position like a position that they would want to be in, right? And then what is that individual, what has been said about them? How do they connect with an audience? Getting them to see how it is applied in their field within the most successful, professional icons that they might have. Then that creates that buy-in for people who've been in the field for a long time. They know that honestly, they do need these skills and that they'll get more success, and they can see the people who have gained that traction and success as those people who can communicate. And not even, Anders, right? Not even necessarily always doing a formal presentation, but it's how do you run an effective meeting? How do you take your idea down the hall to someone who doesn't have exactly the technical expertise you do, but how do you connect with them? So,
right. And as they elevate through the organization, they might be managing, and then people are gauging off them too, right? In terms of modeling their behavior. So, I can see how that can influence a whole, department in that sense. Keith Brown says, knowing the material and teaching the material are two different skills. I think we talked about this in our first meeting, was that, I come from a university that has very strong, school education. Like they teach a lot of teachers, they train a lot of teachers, and then you can have your, PhD in education and be a horrible teacher. It just boggles my mind. So that was kind of, that reminds me of that piece there. Yeah.
And let me stop you and say, they've done research that shows the more expert you are in an area of knowledge,
Mm-hmm.
the less effective you are as a teacher. Because what happens is the more you know about a specific area of expertise, the more also that you assume other people know.
Yeah.
And you go too fast, you use too much jargon. So you fall into some of those pitfalls.
It's kind of the curse of knowledge kind of thing, right? Curse, where you just, you go too deep and it just doesn't work. You're not connecting. That's
translate.
Yeah. So tell me about, like, and those pitfalls that you mentioned in technical presentations. Yeah. And it's one of the things that I teach, instead of going from this data dump straight out of their heads, is start, trying to connect why, kind of bringing an intention in with them. And almost like I talk about coming from the heart, which sounds really cheesy, but it's this idea that it's like, why is this important? This technology, well, it can save people tons of time. And when they start, actually emoting why, all of a sudden you get a lot more texture out of the presentation. And it's like, often technology is not what it is, but what it does for you. It's so important. We need to get behind that.
Well, and it is as you teach people as well, every audience is asking themselves, what's in it for me?
Yeah.
Getting to the heart of those two things. The first thing is to ask yourself, and I always tell people, go, and I'm looking around for, a pad or something, but, go old school, right? Start with paper and a pen and write down your why. At the end of this presentation, what do I want my audience to take away? Why is this important? What is your why? Because you have to know and I love using the term reverse engineering.
Yeah.
If you start,
that'll get their attention, right?
If a presenter knows why the information is important, what is the most important information that they want to get across, if it's persuasive, at the end of this presentation, whether I have 10 minutes or 30 minutes, the thing that I want my audience to do is what? Is it agree with me? Is it to give me funding, to sign off on this recommendation for buy-in, knowing your why, and then being able to also answer the why for the audience. So why, this is important for me. This is what I want out of it. But then why should my audience care? That's what getting into the heart of it, right? Why should they care? Creating a narrative around why it's important. Showing the statistics about, if we don't do this, this can happen. If we do, here are the benefits that you can be a part of. So getting to that why, and then reverse engineering the crafting of your message. So you know that you have 10 minutes. It can't be a data dump, right? You have to string kind of this organizational narrative along to get to that ending place. But 10 minutes versus 30 minutes. And how do you then reverse engineer it and craft using the processes of effective message construction?
Yeah, that's the structure and the content and the time limitations and everything. How do you and maybe you covered this, I'm not sure, but in terms of getting engineers to express themselves a little bit more, because you know what I mean, just in terms of body language, vocal variety, that kind of stuff. What's your experience on that side of things?
Many times, I think you're trying to get here, right?
I'm just with you. Yeah.
But if we think of the stereotypical engineer and technical professional, they tend to be very detail-oriented individuals, linear processors, right? They're very linear thinkers. But how do you get them to kind of come out of their shell a little bit, be dynamic, connect with the audience? giving them tools and devices to begin with. So allowing them to think of analogies, metaphors, a story, a narrative that creates some interest. So it's not necessarily even dependent on their own charisma, right? But giving them those devices to create pathos or emotional appeal with their audience. So
Mhm.
those are good ways to start. And they really kind of, once again, they'll grab onto that because they understand that it's a device. It's a device for connecting with the audience. Another thing is giving them the process for even, yes, you've got an attention getting device in your opening, in your introduction, right? To connect with your audience, whether it's a shocking fact or statistic, a quote, connection, an analogy to something. Then there are three main points, and then how to end, giving them ways to grab hold of their audience. Once again, if you show them the processes, they'll do it. And then once they do it and they see the audience buy-in and the engagement, instead of the tuned out expressions, the tuned in expressions, then that success feeds on itself and they want to do more and more of that and feel more confident and comfortable in their shoes to try out those things and to be a little bolder.
It's the positive feedback loop that an audience can give you, right?
Mhm.
And I talk about this, how performers, they have been molded over years of this, what works, what doesn't, just and then you're shaping who you are on stage, and engineers just don't have that experience yet. So it's nice that they get that pat on the back when things go well and go
And
from
and today, we're so used to mediocre presentations. And
there.
I think everyone, to a large extent, is used to suffering through presentations. That if someone has the tools and the skills and they start to build better presentations, whether it's through their own, crafting of that message, how they're constructing it, how they're constructing their visual aids, that's not so data heavy and text heavy, right? That they stand out and it feeds into that positive feedback loop, right? You just need to do a little better than everybody else at this point to be noticeably better.
Yeah. And that's what I'm seeing in the technology companies that we deal with quite a bit, is those people who are just a little bit better, they get fast tracked to become, the tech evangelist,
Yeah.
because they're the best coming out of that.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's definitely career opportunities for those people who do elevate, their presentation skills. Uh, you're also involved in the executive program there at Johns Hopkins.
Mhm.
And can you talk about, that's where you say your heart is now, or your passion is. So helping executives with their, would you call it executive presence, or how you want to kind of speak to that program, and then maybe the differences or similarities you see with the engineering side of things?
It's all of those executive trainings, executive education. It's all about professional development, no matter who the audience is. It's, and I like to say there are no perfect communicators and there are no perfect presenters or perfect public speakers. There's always just degrees of polish. And so how do we continue to kind of polish that? When we think about the term, as you were saying, and I'll tell you first, Anders, why I love working with professionals and executives, because they are individuals who typically can sometimes be in isolation,
Mhm.
because the higher you go up within your realm, a lot of times people don't want to give you any honest feedback.
Yeah. You get yes men, and you got your, well, not entourage, but right, everyone's wants to be in your good books, and you just don't get that honest feedback that you might possibly need. Yeah.
And think about it. I mean, how many times, and you could ask the audience right now, for anybody who's watching and listening, when you've completed a presentation and you ask your, colleague, how did I do? Oh my gosh, how did I do? What are they going to say?
It's such a loaded question. Like, You
Right.
know, I've been around enough performers, for years that when they ask that, they don't really want feedback on how they did. They just want to have the affirmation that, yeah, it was great. And
Right. And
you,
but and it's an instant kind of, oh, it makes me feel better. But if we know that emotional intelligence, right, outweighs IQ so much, right? When we think about if I'm a professional who wants that actual honest feedback, there might not be anyone around me to give that to me and to help me grow as a professional. So, being in those professional development or executive education workshops, you have individuals who are there who know that they need to advance that skill, that want that feedback, that want that learning, and that want to be able to give that feedback to other people. So it creates this whole environment of a safe place to learn and to grow and to help other people grow. And you don't just grow by learning yourself, but also by observing other people, giving them constructive feedback, confirms or reaffirms that learning process. So I just feel like it's so rich an experience for people to be able to submit themselves, if you will, right,
yeah.
to learning new skills and to being a little vulnerable. I mean, the reality is you have to put yourself, people that come to you, corporations that come to you, they are being vulnerable and saying, we know that we need this. We know that we need to improve. And how can we do that? So,
Mhm. Yeah. And Keith Brown, who is also a performer, I know, what's a better question is to ask your audience to get honest feedback. So it's like, they will tell you, right, that kind of feedback, how to go. But that's the problem right now with virtual presentations, which we haven't even gotten into too much here. But the feedback is not the same, right? And because of that, we have trouble. We have more of a self-awareness issue too, right, with virtual presentations, because we're not exactly sure how we're doing, whereas if we had an audience right in front of us, we could see them zoning out or being on their phones or that sort of thing. We don't always get a chance to see our audiences. And I know you had to shift and pivot, which is of course the big the big term this year, right? How did you change your program for online delivery? We just talked about this earlier too, that not a lot of educators or professors in universities are really that engaging in the first place, and so now for them to shift to, and I said it, not you, I said it.
Okay, I was going to say, don't.
School. That must have been a huge, undertaking, and of course, you have an understanding of what it took. So, can you speak to a little bit how you kind of made that move with your department?
Well, I mean, I'll just be honest. I mean, personally, making the move was back in the spring, knowing that my courses for the university were going to have to be online, and then also these kind of trainings were going to have to shift, and valuing in all of these courses, valuing the engagement piece. The engagement is the key to a successful course in anything, and is successfully engaging with your audience. So how the challenge became, how do I replicate the level of dynamism and engagement that is face-to-face into a virtual environment? And I will say it was a very steep learning curve. I submitted myself to learning things I did not know. My colleagues, partnered up with me, and we helped each other figure out how to do this, using all the tools that we could within Zoom, but also understanding basic presentation skills and what the constraints are with audience attention span. You can lose your audience's attention in 8 seconds. We know that typically every 6 minutes, you need to be shifting the dynamic of teaching, whether it's face-to-face or on Zoom, right? So you've got to be, if I'm speaking at you, even if I'm showing slides, doing something in about 6 minutes, I need to shift that energy back over to my audience somehow. I'm asking them a question. I'm engaging them in a poll. I'm putting them in a breakout room. Knowing how dynamic that needed to be then led us to go back to the building blocks of, okay, how do we recreate the content in a very engaging way? You just can't be passive about that learning.
Yeah, no, and I think I shared this with you too, that my past theater professor that I took theater from in university, he reached out because he was having to teach theater on Zoom. So, there's all kinds of, challenges, obviously. But yeah, that whole changing things up, contrast is one of those principles that we teach, that, you have to be changing things constantly to re-engage that mind, because things fade to the background after a while if nothing changes.
Well, and thought speed, right? We know that the average individual speaks at about 150 to 160 words per minute, but our thought speed is, 1,000 words per minute, right? So if someone, while I'm speaking, you're thinking about what are you having for lunch and where are you going after this, and understanding that challenge I think in the virtual environment, that is even heightened. That is heightened because we know that, yes, I'm looking at you on Zoom, but I also can have open 3 other browsers.
Yes. Shopping on Amazon. You could be watching a movie on Netflix. Like, I talk about this, dopamine spiking device that is right in front of you, and the whole world as at your fingertips, being online. So yeah, it's very tempting for people, I think.
And I think the onus then is on the individual who is responsible for that meeting, for that, presentation, to create engagement opportunities with their audience. I mean, that really becomes your, not just conveying the information as your responsibility, but how do you continually keep them engaged? And whether it's asking them questions along the way and getting them to respond at different points in the chat box, and bouncing off of that, piggybacking, kind of like you've been doing with just, people that pop up comments. You really have to take more of a responsibility for the engagement piece, because, hey, face to face, you are stuck in a room. There just weren't that many places for you to go. Yeah. And if somebody was on their phone, then, it was obvious instead of looking at you.
The shame was more, more accessible or something. You know what I mean? The shame of knowing that you're not paying attention kept you paying attention, right? It's kind of like you were guilted into watching if you were sitting in the audience or if you were in the room. And now you can get away with a little bit more, which means, yeah, it's harder. And I really like what you said, Alexa, about, that we have to take this responsibility of engagement on ourselves. It's not just enough to know the information and communicate it. It has to be taken to another level. And we talk about in our programs too, that, the social media algorithms that are optimized so that it brings your attention back to these platforms. That's what we're competing with. And yet, what have we done to optimize our skill set in terms of engagement? And that's what's kind of needed right now, what we're hearing.
And I think, honestly, at this point in time, it's probably never been easier to stand out. It's probably never actually been easier to be better than everybody else. Yeah. If you just embrace that learning a little bit and shift the way you're thinking about your presentation to be more engaging rather than just, a one-way communication, you can stand out. Right? I see Rob says something.
Yes, she says interaction is one of the key components for engagement in both virtual and live presentations, and Robin knows a thing or two about presentations for sure. So she is one of the world-leading trade show presenters. So she's done her share of presentations and and we're talking technical presentations. You should see some of the things Robin's probably had to present over the years. Very technical, making that relatable and interacting with her audience. Yeah, I mean, there's so much to unpack here. I mean, I think we'll have to do this again sometime, just because I love talking with you and getting your I love your all these great facts and the kind of a little bit more of the psychology and everything that's built into there. And so I love hearing your perspective on things here. And so I want to thank you, Alexa, for coming on. I do want to pop up, if anyone wants to connect with you, let me pop up your LinkedIn, right? So people can reach out to you, and I believe the book is available probably anywhere books are sold kind of thing. Is that the case?
It's on Amazon. It's on Amazon. It's on Wiley. IEEE. It's there. And I would love to engage with anyone. I've, posted a couple of articles. There are things that if somebody goes to my LinkedIn, they might can see kind of back through some of the articles that I've posted on just increasing your sphere of influence through speaking, or some tips about visual aids or technical presentations. So I'd love to connect with anyone.
Awesome. Awesome.
Thank you for having me on, because I enjoy, obviously, I appreciate that my brother connected us. I get connected to someone whose real profession is boosting engagement for companies. And so I think that's obviously needed, not just on the one-to-one level like I do, but for corporations, for businesses.
Yeah, it is much needed. Thank you for that, Alexa. I appreciate it. And thanks everyone for watching, and we'll see you next time on Engaging Personalities. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.